How do we? Cool. Awesome. So, welcome everyone. My name is Felipe, and I will be your host for today's webinar focused on database as a service deployments in the real world. So, the shift to a managed database solution is often tied to several benefits, such as shorter development cycles, almost zero downtime, uptime promises, and of course, ease of use. Despite these promises, there are several important considerations when selecting a DBaaS vendor. In this webinar, we will cover some of the considerations you must be aware of and give you some real-world examples involving the risks, the rewards, and trade-offs as part of your adoption. In summary, our goal here is to tell you what no one ever dared to tell you about until now. Moving on, for those of you who are not familiar with ScyllaDB yet, it is the database behind Game Changers. Organizations whose success depends upon delivering engaging experiences with impressive speed. ScyllaDB was built with a close-to-the-metal design that squeezes every possible ounce of performance out of modern hardware. This translates to predictable low latencies, even at high throughputs. And with such a consistent innovation, the adoption of our database technology has grown to over 400 key players worldwide. So, many of you will recognize some of the companies among the selection pictured here, such as Starbucks, who leveraged ScyllaDB for inventory management, Zillow for real-time property listing and updates, and Comcast Xfinity, who power all their DVR scheduling with ScyllaDB. So as it can be seen from the magnificent listing we have here, ScyllaDB is used across many different types of industries and for entirely different types of use cases. More than often, your company probably has a use case that's a perfect fit for ScyllaDB, and it may be that you just don't know it yet. Going on to our introductions. So I am Felipe Mendez, and I work as a solution architect for ScyllaDB. My main role is to work closely with users during their cloud adoption journey, gather requirements, offer consultation, and ensure that ScyllaDB is the right solution for their needs. I have been working with distributed systems and databases for over 10 years, and during my career, I have always been an open source fan and a proud member of the Linux community. Partnering with me today, we have Michael Hollander. So, hey, Michael, again, and do you mind introducing yourself to our crowd, please?
Sure. So, hi, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm Michael Hollander, Director of Product at ScyllaDB. Basically, my work revolves around Scylla Cloud. And I used to be a full-stack developer in multiple companies and smaller, larger enterprises. And I led product in various companies such as security or BizOps, and later on DevTools related companies. So excited to be here today.
Thank you very much, Michael. And with that, now that you guys got to know us, let's quickly walk through our agenda for today. So first, let's cover the basic aspects of a DBaaS, the promises that it entails, understand what is the shared responsibility service model, and what are some of the key aspects that should be your guidance when you are evaluating competitors. Then me and Michael have broken down the talk on 5 pillars, how a DBaaS can help you, and what are the considerations that you need to take from a developer perspective, from a costs perspective, from a security perspective, and then performance and management perspectives. Here we are going to cover what you should expect to readily benefit from, but also some red flags and trade-offs that you must consider, and oftentimes you may not be aware. And last but not least, we'll do a QA where we are going to try to address all of your questions. All right? So you may be wondering, guys, why are we talking about a DBaaS again? Because let's be honest, so a DBaaS is probably now around the 10-year-old term. However, whether you call it a DBaaS, a cloud database, or managed database services, one of the things that we have realized is that nowadays there are so many different options out there and different vendors for you to choose from that oftentimes choosing the most suitable vendor for your needs may become a very challenging task. For example, we have multi-model managed solutions, which carry on the promise of being highly optimized for whatever workload you put at it, whether it is structured or unstructured data. There are high performance and low latency oriented ones, which typically are primarily focused on NoSQL workloads, and that's essentially the case for ScyllaDB Cloud. And we also have managed relational databases, which typically serves an entirely different purpose. On top of this, we also have serverless. We now have the concept of edge types of databases. We have multi-tenant versus dedicated environment and different deployment options among all these different ranges of DBaaS offerings. Each one, where each one has its own characteristics and its own drawbacks. Okay, but no matter which solution you end up on choosing, the chances are that if you go to the website of any DBaaS vendor, the very same set of benefits are going to be presented to you. And the very same set of pains will also be addressed no matter which solution you end up on choosing. So despite these obvious benefits, it is important for us to ask ourselves, with so many options out there, what really distinguishes one solution from another? And what are the specifics that are either hidden or hard for us to find that may turn our selected solution to become a catastrophic failure? So we are not here to disparage a specific solution in favor of others. In particular, you're going to here we talk very little about Scylla Cloud, but since we work for Scylla Cloud, we are going to use ScyllaDB Cloud a lot in our examples. But we also have to play somehow the devil's advocate here, because we believe that transparency is key towards building a trusted relationship with our customers. That said, it is that definitely true that we work for ScyllaDB and we have our ScyllaDB Cloud offering, but it doesn't necessarily mean that our cloud solution will always be the best solution to your needs, even though that's our ultimate goal. And as I said and mentioned previously, it pretty much depends on your use case and what you're looking to get out of your DBaaS solution. Okay, moving on. So you have probably been presented with a similar comparison chart like this when you were looking after a managed database. This chart is great because it greatly simplifies the overall distinction among you running a self-managed solution on your own versus running it on top of a managed database. On one hand, you are responsible for everything, which means that you have more control over all the aspects of your deployment. And on the other hand, in a DBaaS, you care only about the application when the remaining aspects are essentially deferred to a third-party organization. One of the key aspects that most vendors forget to tell you about, however, is that this chart over here actually represents what we call a shared responsibility service model. So despite the obvious benefits and the infrastructure simplification shown in this slide, you are not only responsible for how you interact with the database, but depending on what you do with the database, it may prevent your vendor from fulfilling its SLAs. Therefore, it is important that you define with your vendor the criteria and what conditions on which they will be able to fulfill their obligations. If that's too confusing, let me give you an example. So in Scylla Cloud, we require you to use a replication factor of 3 for your key spaces in order to prevent data loss. If you don't follow these recommendations, then you are subject to placing your deployment at risk. Another example that you may need would be, for example, a Google Big Table deployment, where although it's not recommended by Google, they do allow you to provision a big table cluster under a single availability zone and be subject to an outage should an AZ ever go down. So ensure that you always you keep this shared responsibility model in mind, because we are going to reference it later during our talk. Okay, so all that said, given the enormous amount of different DBaaS vendors out there, and always the promise that one solution is better than another, we believe that is particularly important for you to focus on 3 specific areas in order to understand whether a specific solution makes sense to you as opposed to another. So the first important area is defining your goals before you start your selection process. For example, what do you want to achieve out of a DBaaS? Maybe you have a data-intensive application which is very latency sensitive. Maybe your workloads heavily rely on ACID requirements. The next area is speed, which entails pretty much several aspects that you should be analyzing, but we can summarize on how easy it is for us to get started and moving along with the solution that we choose. Here, you should focus on the learning curve needed and potential limitations or requirements that are mandatory for your workload and your organization. But most importantly, remember to factor in how much time the vendor you are after can save you, because after all, that's the entire goal of switching to a DBaaS, which is to get your go-to-market and your development operations to flow much more smoothly. And lastly, costs. Consider factoring in how much your goals, the ease to get started, and all the bundled features will end up costing you. Sometimes you may find that although the solution in question is compelling, the prices are not really attractive. And think about beyond getting started, whether there are any hidden costs, such as networking transfer costs, or if you're running a paper operations type of service model, does it make sense for your existing throughput? Does it make sense given your existing throughput requirements? And lastly, consider where you want to be in the future. Maybe today you are starting small, but you expect your workload to scale in the foreseeable future. And you definitely don't want to spend a large amount of your budget just on a database, right? Given these aspects for you to focus on, let's now drill down to specific areas where a managed database may help you out, as well as the red flags that you should be aware of, plus some known trade-offs and decisions that you need to make. Let's start from a developer point of view. So, reward. The primary benefits of a managed database from a developer perspective are definitely the easy to integrate an existing solution to their already used stacks. Managed databases typically offer integration to, several APIs, automation platforms. So you can typically integrate with Terraform or Ansible, and your own preferred programming languages, etc., which makes it very easy for us to, quickly spin up environments and tear down those environments, integrate with our CI/CD pipelines, etc., and so forth. There are several managed solutions which have mechanisms for you to quickly introduce and roll back schema changes. And typically, those vendors will advertise those schema changing features as zero impact schema changes. This is important because no one really wants to introduce a business impact just because you added, I don't know, a new column to one of your tables. And to that point, here at ScyllaDB, we now support Raft, which guarantees that if you are running on top of Scylla Cloud, all of your schema changes are done in a strong, consistent way, and you pretty much have zero performance impact when as you modify your application to adapt to new business demands. So that's typically a plus. That comes from a developer perspective. And back to the ease of creating and tearing down environments, the other clear benefit is, of course, self-service. This means that the developer is essentially now back in control. The developer is centralized when it comes to the point when you adopt a DBaaS solution. And, the main benefit here is that if we compare it to a regular deployment model, he no longer has to go through a lengthy process to get a simple modification done in the database. And all he needs to do is to focus on deploying the code whenever there's a compelling need to do so. So those are the rewards. And if we talk about risks, some of the risks of adhering to a managed solution, of course, will eventually drill down to the blocking aspect of things. Although managed solution will be very flexible for you in the sense that you can typically use, you typically have access to, RESTful APIs, gRPC endpoints. You can, depending on the vendor, you have access to graph query languages or document or JSON-oriented type of APIs. One of the things that you really need to consider is how making use of these APIs are compatible with other solutions in the market. For example, maybe you are running all of your databases on top of DynamoDB today, but tomorrow you have this customer, and I already have heard this history, guys, so this is not something that came up out of my mind. Maybe tomorrow you have this customer who requires you that your infrastructure, your database run on premises, or I don't know, maybe on top of another cloud vendor such as GCP or Azure, due it to some sort of regulation, restriction, or whatever. Nowadays, of course, moving off of DynamoDB can be challenging, especially when you are heavily integrated with the AWS ecosystem. But luckily for you, for this example specifically, and that's why I heard those stories oftentimes, thanks to our ScyllaDB API compatibility with Dynamo, this is not really a huge problem, which is a specific example because ScyllaDB, DynamoDB workloads run just fine on top of ScyllaDB with pretty much zero code changes. So yeah, locking is something that you should definitely be aware of, because maybe it's very easy for you to get in, but getting out sometimes is a completely different story. The other risk that you should be aware of is the technology refresh aspect of things. Remember that a DBaaS will typically host several different customers, and potentially manage an even larger number of different deployments. As a result, it's very unlikely that you will receive quality updates in a timely manner, unless, of course, you are hit by a bug which ends up impacting your live traffic. In that sense, also consider the fact that since the underlying infrastructure and the database software itself are managed by your vendor, you have to consider the fact that updates may introduce problems that weren't there before in such a way that you also need to take care of, ensuring that you're testing your CI/CD pipelines cover not only the same database version that you are currently running on in production, but also the ones that your vendor may eventually roll out to you, which you probably will want to test in a separate testing cluster. All right. And if we move on from the risks, we get to the trade-offs. The first trade-off that from a developer perspective that we should be aware of is the learning curve. In particular, consider all the time and effort that you will put in order to integrate your existing solutions to DBaaS you are evaluating. Maybe your team is more comfortable working with the Cassandra API, and learning a new technology may well take some time for the team to adjust. Here, you will also want to factor in how many changes, if any, you will need to make to your existing applications, whether you will need to rethink your data modeling, and how you will eventually migrate your data over to the DBaaS solution so you can run it in production. All right. And the second aspect that we are essentially covering here is the lack of customization. What do we mean by that? Well, in general, guys, managed solutions try to be as general purpose as possible, in such a way that it is typically able to serve a wide variety of customers and workloads. For example, maybe your organization has a requirement to manage authentication via LDAP. That's a totally valid use case. Or to integrate encryption with your own KMIP server. Or maybe you are already running the database you like on-prem with a specific tuning parameter, which is really important for your use case. More than often, you will need to discuss these aspects with your vendor, but there are very high chances that they may not be able to satisfy all of your requirements. So consider thinking about alternatives, if any exist, and whether it is something that makes sense for you to trade off. Okay? So this pretty much covers the development perspective. Now let me switch to Michael, who is going to give us an overview of costs. And Michael, my buddy, I spoke too much. Whew, the crowd is yours now.
Thanks, Felipe. All right, so cost is another big topic when considering a move from self-managed to managed database solutions. So let's start by taking a look at some of the rewards related to costs. So DBaaS eliminates the need for physical infrastructure and dedicated staff. So with DBaaS, you basically don't have to invest in hardware or worry about its maintenance. Instead, the infrastructure is provided and managed by the DBaaS vendor, and which basically results in significant cost savings. So by adopting DBaaS, you can basically allocate your resources more efficiently. So you can focus on your core operations, innovations, and also improving the customer experience, rather than spending this on hardware procurement and management. So in addition, DBaaS reduces staffing costs. So with the self-managed database, companies need a dedicated team of DevOps engineers as well as developers. DBaaS, on the other hand, shifts these responsibilities to the vendor itself. So there is no need for a specialized database team. And this basically allows you to optimize your workforce and also allocate the relevant staff to more strategic initiatives that you may have. So let's move on to pricing and deployment. It's a previous, yeah, thanks. So DBaaS providers usually offer two types of price plans. You've got pay-as-you-go and annual pricing. And the pay-as-you-go pricing model of DBaaS is particularly an advantage here because it eliminates the need for upfront capital and it enables also cost optimization by aligning expenses with actual database usage. So this flexibility is beneficial for you if you're a startup or an organization with limited resources. Now, most DBaaS vendors offer a single deployment model where the customer's database sits on the vendor's cloud provider infrastructure. There is another model, which is also referred to as bring your own account, where the database remains on your own organization's cloud provider infrastructure. And this deployment is especially beneficial for enterprises because if you have, for example, a very good relations with your cloud provider, you'll be able to save costs on your infrastructure by obtaining pre-negotiated discounts. Also, since the database resources remain on your existing infrastructure, you won't have to deal with additional security matters. Finally, you will also be able to manage your cloud provider bills in the same way as other existing infrastructure that you are already consuming today. So let's move on to the risks associated to moving to a DBaaS solution. The first risk we need to address is the unpredictable nature of cost scaling when using DBaaS. So while it offers scalability, the cost of scaling your database may not follow a linear or at least easily predictable pattern. So as your application's workload increases, there may be unexpected usage spikes or maybe sudden scaling needs, which can both potentially lead to higher costs. So when your application gets exposed to a sudden increase in traffic or data volume, the resource requirements for a database may increase significantly. And this can result in unexpected expenses because you need to scale up your database to meet the growing demands. So it's essential for you to closely monitor and analyze the cost implications of scaling. And this is mainly to avoid any surprises in your budget. Now, while DBaaS providers generally provide transparent pricing, there can still be costs that are not immediately visible. These costs often arise from additional services or, for example, specific features that may not be covered by the base pricing. So, for example, you may require specialized support or advanced features for your specific use case, and these services might come at an extra cost. So it's crucial to carefully review the service level agreements and also pricing documentation provided by your DBaaS provider or vendor so that you can identify any potential hidden costs. A concrete example is from one of our customers who actually switched from another vendor to ScyllaDB Cloud after they had run into massive additional and unexpected variable costs. And these costs were mainly associated to network usage. So the costs were so unexpected and engineers could not explain this internally on why this happened. And so some engineers were actually fired as a result. So understanding and accounting for these hidden and unanticipated costs is very important, both for accurate budgeting, but also for cost management. And it ensures that you have a comprehensive understanding of the total cost of ownership, but that you also can make a better and more informed decision regarding the most cost-effective approach for your own organization. Now, let's dive into the trade-offs associated with costs when using a DBaaS solution. So the first trade-off we'll discuss is limited cost optimizations. While DBaaS solutions offer cost savings, they may limit the ability to optimize costs to the same extent as self-managed databases. So in the DBaaS environment, optimizing hardware configurations or, for example, applying performance tuning may be restricted due to the constraints which were imposed by the service provider. DBaaS solution also provides a standardized infrastructure which basically caters to a wide range of use cases. So while this, on the one hand, simplifies operations, it may limit your ability to implement very customized cost-saving strategies. So it's always essential to evaluate the extent to which you can optimize the costs within the boundaries of your DBaaS environment. And for example, optimizing hardware configurations or adjusting resource allocation may be restricted in a DBaaS environment. Also, fine-tuning the parameters which are specific to your workload or otherwise implementing specialized caching strategies may also have some limitations there. So bottom line, you should be careful evaluating these considerations in order to determine the impact on your cost optimization efforts. Moving on to the next trade-off, cost comparisons and total cost of ownership. So when comparing the cost between DBaaS and self-managed databases, performing an analysis of the total cost of ownership is very essential. This analysis involves considering multiple factors such as hardware, licenses, maintenance, personnel or staff, and also other operational expenses which are associated with managing a database in-house. And it's crucial to compare these costs against the ongoing subscription fees and any additional expenses which are associated with the DBaaS solution. And this evaluation allows you to make an informed decision by understanding the true cost implications of each option. So by conducting a cost ownership analysis, you can evaluate the long-term financial impact of using a DBaaS solution against managing your database infrastructure on your own in-house. And this analysis will provide you with a holistic view of the cost involved, but it will also help you in making a well-informed decision based on your own organization's specific requirements and budget considerations. So we went through the different cost implications when moving to DBaaS. Now, I also want to highlight our ScyllaDB Cloud Pricing Calculator, which we've built, and which compares the price between different scenarios of ScyllaDB and other vendors, such as DynamoDB. And of course, you shouldn't take a word for it, and you should just compare it for yourself using the calculator, which is available on our website. And you can apply your custom measurements and then just compare the results for yourself. Moving on to security and privacy. So when you're migrating a database to the cloud, one of the biggest concerns is security. A data that is stored in the cloud is more exposed to hacking, for example, or breaches or unauthorized access. And to mitigate these risks, your organization should choose and ensure that your DBaaS provider has robust security measures in place. This can be, for example, encryption, access controls, multi-factor authentication, but it should also undergo regular security audits. In addition, DBaaS solutions often offer backup and disaster recovery mechanisms, and this can basically minimize the risk of data loss in the event of, for example, a system failure or a natural disaster or even a cyber attack. And this reduces the burden on your own organization to set up or manage your own data replication and backup strategies. And as a company, you also usually have organizational policies and requirements for accessing external tools or platforms. So you should make sure that your DBaaS vendor offers capabilities such as single sign-on, data encryption, and relevant certifications such as SOC 2 compliance, for example, which provides an independent assessment of how well your database vendor manages data. And this can be with respect to security, availability, but also confidentiality and, of course, privacy. And also, some DBaaS vendors utilize shared infrastructure, depending on the product that you're using. And so multiple clients' database, in this case, are hosted on the same physical infrastructure. And this shared environment introduces a level of risk as a security breach or vulnerability in one client's database could potentially impact the others. So your organization should assess the vendor's isolation, and segregation mechanisms in order to mitigate these risks and ensure you get consistent data privacy. And finally, if you're an enterprise organization with strict security requirements, you can use a bring your own account deployment model, which is an approach that I referred to in an earlier slide. And this will allow all of your database data to basically be located inside your existing pre-approved infrastructure. Cool. So going back to Felipe, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. And sorry about the slide hiccup. As you can see, I am a terrible slide driver. But yeah, it was my fault,
okay.
people. Sorry about that. But yeah, thanks. So let's now, that was a very good overview of our costs and security, the security aspects. Thank you for that. But yeah, let's now analyze those aspects from a performance perspective, and which I am quite certain a lot of you are very excited about. Performance is always a hot topic. So let's start with some of the rewards. So manage a database makes it extremely easy nowadays for you to place your data close to your application and closer to your end users. Most all, if not all, support multi-region replication, which allows you to easily build and deploy an always-on type of architecture with simply a few clicks of a button. And this simplicity, in contrast to self-managed deployments, can greatly pay off and enable you to, run specific sets of use cases that would be very prohibitive to get running if you were not to be running inside a DBaaS solution. One of example of such use cases is what we call the smart replication ones. So what is those use cases specifically? For example, think about a worldwide media streaming service where you have different catalogs you want to display for certain countries, such as, for example, you have a catalog of content that's available in your streaming service in North America, but you will have a totally different catalog that you want to display for your users who are living in Europe, for example. So this is essentially what smart replication is the capability of you to target replication of a specific set of data to a given location according to the user needs. Another example that's a very interesting one is what Zero Flux is doing with ScyllaDB. So think about sports betting data, where you have users all around the globe, and you need to ensure that as a gaming match progresses, all the users see the very same data with as little latency as possible. For example, I'm a Brazilian, so I love football, which Americans call soccer. And during the World Cup final, we can easily see how the betting odds probably fluctuated to people who were interested in placing their bets. So Zero Flux use case is essentially doing this. And that's essentially what colocation enables you to do fairly easily with a DBaaS. The next reward that we have pictured here is the ease of scale. And here, you want to ensure that when you test your selected database as a service provider, you also want to ensure that it is able to be resilient enough to sustain sudden traffic spikes. So in general, most vendors will typically provide you via an UI an easy means for you to quickly scale out or scale up your deployment. But here you may want to watch out for solutions which don't allow you to transition between service tiers. Okay, some DBaaS vendors have tiers like, oh, small deployment, medium deployment, large deployment, enterprise deployment, or some other naming that they come up with. And not all vendors allow you to, okay, you are in a small deployment now, you can go to a medium tier now. And why is it important? After all, you don't want, to find yourself in a situation where your application is running fine, steadily, but then the Black Friday comes and no one is able to use your application because your database become unavailable since you have a much higher load than you had before. How we handle this at ScyllaDB Cloud? We essentially support unlimited scale, and as long as there is enough hardware available under the cloud vendor, we will add as many nodes as you require and need in order to satisfy any possible increase in traffic that you may require. In particular, we have supported several customers during the Black Friday and during the Super Bowl. So one of the things that we do is typically, if there is an expected anticipated growth spike in traffic, we would scale out the infrastructure beforehand, and right after the event, we would scale it down back to where your steady traffic is typically used to run. So we are very flexible in that way. Okay. All right. Now, risks related to performance. So the first aspect that I want to touch base here, shed some light into the unpredictable cost of scale that Michael has anticipated in his talk. And guys, this is really important. Be sure of your throughput requirements and how much growth you anticipate for your use case. This is important, okay? In particular, we have seen this history being told so many times, but users still make the very same mistakes. If you are running up to a few thousand of operations per second, a pay-per-operations service model probably makes sense for you. But as you grow to tens of thousands and beyond of operations, things start to get really expensive. And when we talk about operations here, we talk about operations per second, okay? As a result, it is no surprise that many users come to ScyllaDB Cloud because we simply don't charge you by the number of operations that you run, and you simply pay for the licenses for the infrastructure that you chose, which makes things much simpler for everybody, okay? And the next aspect that you should be mindful about are potential hidden limits or quotas that your managed database provider may impose that may end up impacting your performance. Some examples. DynamoDB has a limit on an item size of 400 kilobytes per item. And if you try to go beyond those 400 kilobytes, the database will simply refuse your request. There's nothing you can do. It's a hard limit. On top of that, you may see your throughput being throttled down if you try to get past your partition allowance, or if your vendor also imposes a hard limit on the number of operations that you can run on top of a single item or a single partition or a single anything that they may define. And for some use cases, especially when you are running real-time applications, which are typically very latency sensitive, they cannot be subject to throttling because this basically ruins latencies. So the way that we approach this here at ScyllaDB Cloud is very simple. We don't impose any workload restrictions. When you provision a cluster, you get your nodes and you got the hardware, and you can run queries as much as you are able to. And since we are only limited by the underlying hardware capabilities, as long as the database can cope up with the traffic of your workload, we won't limit you in any way. Okay, so just gives you a lot of flexibility in that regard. Switching on to the trade-offs, guys, another important aspect. You should never forget that DBaaS is essentially a business model. This means that as your managed database vendor contributes to your growth, at the same time, they are capturing more revenue. Why is this important for you? You do need to take that, understand that. This is very simple. It's how business works. So what this means is that although it's very easy to scale and to add more replicas and workloads and DBaaS, most vendors will only allow you to choose between a specific range of options, which may not necessarily be the most performant infrastructure out of there for your particular workload. For example, perhaps you have a real-time workload which reads a lot of code data in such a way that disk I/O access is really important to you, but it may be that your vendor simply doesn't support provisioning your database on top of NVMe storage. And in that regard, you'll be simply stuck with the options that your vendor gives you, okay? And finally, the last trade-off is related to maintenance and operations, which is quite simple over here. Given that when you switch to a DBaaS, you defer everything to, except of course the application development, to a third party. This means that if you end up hitting performance problems, you will have less visibility on what may be going on under the hood, effectively reducing your ability to troubleshoot stuff. As a result, you will have to work closely with your vendor in order to determine the root cause of a given performance problem. To that sense, the list that you should expect from a DBaaS solution, and we are going to also cover this shortly, is that they should give you a wide visibility over the performance of your database, such as how we do in ScyllaDB Cloud, where you have access to all the monitoring metrics that you can easily export to your favorite solution of your choice. Okay, and this brings us to the last part of our presentation, which is the management side of things. Let's start real quick with the rewards. Guys, databases are complex beasts, and even experts sometimes have trouble dealing with them. And when we talk about distributed databases, things only get even more complex. The good news is that a managed database will typically also come with expert consultation in order to help you along the way during, sizing, optimizations that you may need to do in order to adopt their solution, and data modeling consultation, and so on. After all, as I previously mentioned, DBaaS is essentially a business. So it's, of course, just business interest to ensure that you succeed. Therefore, don't be afraid to ask questions and to consult with your vendor over any potential doubts or concerns that you may have. In particular, a mistake that we see people often making is that they simply don't ask questions until after they are already trying to implement the solution in production and they realize that it's not working. Asking questions and getting to know your vendor is critical for you to, save time and effort. And the next reward also alludes to what I just previously mentioned. Most vendors will sometimes provide you some level of observability, but to that point, always ensure that their provided metrics are suitable for your daily needs. Once again, here, remember to ask questions such as, what are the alerts monitored by your DBaaS? How do they handle those alerts? Whether you can be notified of these, and whether you can customize any specific alerts to, suit your SLA needs. Moving on to risks, we already spoke about SLAs in the beginning of the presentation, when we spoke about the shared responsibility service model presented present in managed database offerings. What is missing here is for you to understand exactly and how are the conditions on which your vendor will be able to fulfill that those SLAs. Here's a little story for you, a real story. One of our customers eventually hit me up in a meeting, and they asked the following question. Felipe, let's suppose that there is an AWS region outage in North Virginia, the US East region of AWS. What are the chances that if such a situation occurs, my cluster will be the first one on which you guys will work on? Well, to be fairly simple and honest, guys, chances are really small. And although we will try our best to bring your workload up and running as soon as possible, it might well be that we are unable to do so because the problem may be outside of your DBaaS control, or simply because the team may be busy focused on restoring other clusters that are running in the same region as yours. So keep these aspects in mind and clear out any doubts that you may have concerning the ability of your provider to fulfill their SLAs. The second risk that we highlighted here is how easy it is for you to actually ask for help. In particular, some DBaaS vendors may work with different tier levels of support on which you may either not be entitled to get any support, which is weird because you are paying for the service, or you may simply end up in a tier where you lack qualified personnel to assist you with a given problem. Again, be sure to discuss these aspects with your vendor and understand how you can best interact with them, as well as understand what's included and what's not in your offering. And to conclude our talk, trade-offs, remember that it's really important for you to build trust with your vendor. It's important that you both understand and agree on which one's responsibilities and duties, because it's critical so that there is, so that the both parties can work together. In particular, it is critical that you select a vendor that is committed to your success. Otherwise, it means that the relationship already started wrongly in the first place, and very likely you have trouble in a foreseeable future. And I'm not speaking that out of nothing. I have a real horror story for you. We once met with now a customer, but at the time he was a desperate prospect. And what happened is that they had been kicked off of their previous DBaaS solution because their vendor suddenly, without any further notice or lead time, decided to end their operations. And it's an awkward situation for you to find yourself at, and you definitely don't want to find yourself in that situation. Okay, so building trust is really important. And lastly, but no less important, guys, it's really unfortunate, but it's also part of life. Problems happen, and it has happened to large enterprises. And honestly, there's very little that your vendor or you can do to prevent a problem from happening. And the sooner you realize that, the better it will be your relationship with your vendor, as it will help you building trust. Okay? After all, one of the trade-offs that you have for switching to a DBaaS solution is that when a problem happens, your vendor will be your only hope. Okay? And this essentially brings us to the end of our presentation. We have some minutes left. Before we get to the Q&A section, we have added the following resources for you to get started with ScyllaDB and ScyllaDB Cloud. Go to ScyllaDB.com/cloud and sign up in order to start a free trial. Also, be sure to sign up for Scylla University Live, which is going next week. It's going live next week, and we will be doing live presentations covering both ScyllaDB basics and advanced topics. I will be there next week presenting how to migrate to workloads to ScyllaDB Cloud. And lastly, but no less important, if you do care about performance, be sure to register to P99Conf. P99Conf is a vendor-neutral virtual event centered around low latency and high performance design. It's free for you to register. And in this year's P99, we'll have some speakers. I don't know if you ever heard about the name, Michael. Companies such as Netflix, Meta, TikTok, Google, and of course, ScyllaDB. Quite funny, huh? All right. So, all that said, let's get started with our Q&A. The first question that we have is, what about data migration? And it's not really clear what do you mean by what about data migration, but it's definitely something that you should be concerned about when you are selecting a DBaaS solution, especially if you're going to switch between solutions. For example, if you're running, I don't know, Bigtable today and you want to switch to MongoDB Atlas, the data modeling is going to be very different. How am I going to migrate? So my suggestion to you is for you to either check on your vendor documentation, what are the migration options, or simply ask your vendor. Here for ScyllaDB, if we're going to migrate from Cassandra to DynamoDB, we do have our own Scylla Migrator tool, which is essentially based on Apache Spark, which you can simply hook in your application and point to your Scylla Cloud cluster, and then it will do all the migration for you automatically with a simple press of a button. Okay, I hope I answered the question. We have some minutes left, so Michael, one question for you. A ScyllaDB Cloud one. Okay, which security certifications does ScyllaDB Cloud have, and are we a good fit for PCI DSS, the payment card industry?
Right, good question. So very quickly before we end, we are SOC 2 compliant. We also have multiple ISO certificates, and we are also in the process of becoming PCI DSS compliant. So if you do have this requirement, please reach out to us. We can let you know as soon as we achieve this type of certification.
Yeah, great. So PCI is coming. All right, so I can see we still have some questions, but unfortunately we are on top of the hour, and we are going to follow up with you via email to answer all of your questions, okay? In the meantime, Michael, my buddy, thank you very much for partnering here with me today. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Yeah, be sure to follow us on our social media, and stay in touch. See you guys. Bye.